In Luke chapter 12, after Jesus got done telling his disciples not to worry about food and clothes, that there's more to life than those things, and watch out for covetousness, as he had told the people just before that, he then tells his disciples in Luke chapter 12, and starting in verse 35, how they need to be ready for his coming, ready for whenever God sends the Master, whenever the Master does come, for them to be faithful, ready servants, watching and ready at all times. Let's look at this together. Beginning in verse 35, he says to them, "Let your waist be girded and your lamps burning." Again, the mode of serving and ready, the waist, girded. We could look at it a couple different ways, but as a servant, girded with a towel, girded with whatever was needed, ready to serve, lamps burning, ready to go, maybe even their garments tied up, ready to go. "You yourselves be like men who wait for their master when he will return from the wedding, that when he comes and knocks, that they may open to him immediately." So he gives this idea of a master who, after a wedding, coming back from the wedding, that as soon as he's back and he knocks on the door, the servants are there ready to serve. And then Jesus says, verse 37, "Blessed are those servants whom the master, when he comes, will find watching. Assuredly I say to you that he will gird himself and have them sit down to eat, and will come and serve them. And if he should come in the second watch or come in the third watch and find them so, blessed are those servants." So whatever time, as he just said, whatever time the master comes, if he finds his servants ready, watching, ready to serve, he said in verse 37, the master will gird himself and serve his servants, because they were ready. They were ready and willing to serve him. But verse 39, Jesus goes on to say, "But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect." So what Jesus does here is actually he goes from this illustration, this picture of servants being ready at all times to serve their master at whatever time he may show up. Jesus then switches pictures there in verse 39 to, well, let's say there's somebody's house, and it says if they had known what hour a thief was coming to break in, then he would have watched and been ready and not allowed his house to be broken into. So two ways, the servants being ready, a man ready to protect his home, his possessions. The point is, verse 40, Jesus says to them, "Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect." Well then Peter, in verse 41, Peter actually speaks up and says to Jesus, "Lord, do you speak this parable only to us or to all people?" Because Jesus he had directed his attention all the way back in verse 22. He had started speaking specifically to his disciples. Now Jesus is kind of given, this parable of sorts, and Peter's wondering, and maybe the others with him, okay, is that just for us, or is that for other people, or what's going on here? Well, Jesus says to him in verse 42, "Who then is that faithful and wise steward, whom his master will make ruler over his household, to give them their portion of food in due season?" So again, another picture of a faithful and wise servant, a faithful and wise steward, whom his master has made ruler over his household to give them their portion of food in due time. Blessed is that servant. Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. You know, if a master puts somebody in charge of his place and land and the productivity, and he comes back and finds the steward has been doing all the things he should be doing, well, he's going to be blessed. Truly I say to you that he will make him ruler over all that he has. I mean, the master is going to be impressed with the steward. The steward is going to prove himself worthy of being in a position of ruling over what this master has. But if that servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and then he begins to beat the male and female servants, and he begins to eat and drink and be drunk, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and at an hour when he is not aware, and will cut him in two, and appoint him his portion with the unbelievers. And that servant who knew his master's will and did not prepare himself or do according to his will be beaten with many stripes. But he who did not know, yet committed things deserving of stripes, shall be beaten with a few. For everyone to whom much is given, from him much will be required, and to whom much has been committed, of him they will ask the more. So there's kind of quite a bit going on in this last little section as Jesus is talking to Peter and the rest of the disciples, and I'm sure any others who were listening as well. Again, Jesus gave the parable of the faithful servant, the servants who are ready, the man who's ready to protect his house. Jesus then says, okay, after Peter asked him, well, who are you talking, who is this meant for? And Jesus says, okay, here's the question. Who then is the faithful and wise servant? Well, the faithful and wise servant or steward that a master puts over his house is the one who does his job, who's ready, who's working, who's doing the things the master put him in charge of doing. He will be made ruler over all that he has. But again, that's contrasted with the servant or the steward who's put in charge, but he's like, nah, well, I got time. My master's delaying. He hasn't showed up yet. And so he starts just doing whatever he wants. He's not doing the work he's supposed to do. He's being violent and ugly towards the other people. He's eating and drinking and getting drunk and just living it up. But the master will come on a day when he's not expecting. Have you ever maybe been in that situation, been guilty of that, in some way that maybe you were supposed to be somewhere or doing something and, but you think, oh, well, nobody's coming, nobody's here yet, and then they show up and you weren't ready? Well, that's what Jesus is talking about here. It says that man will be cut in two, he'll be executed, be punished. And then like that servant, then next, the servant in verse 47 who knew the master's will but didn't prepare himself or do it, well, there's going to be punishment. And the one who didn't know, still, okay, maybe you say, well, he didn't know, but still he did things deserving of punishment. He will still be punished. I think the point Jesus is making there is the more we know, the more responsible we are. The more we know, the more we're going to be held accountable for what we do or what we fail to do. Jesus' whole point in all of this is for us to be, he was telling his disciples, and it still applies to us today, is to be those servants that are watching for the Lord to come again, when the Son of Man will come at an hour that nobody knows, nobody's going to expect. We've got to be ready, watching, praying, active in the work of the Lord, serving the Lord, not just sitting around waiting, doing nothing, but truly living for God. Ready, willing, doing, active for the Lord, so that when he comes, he'll find us watching. He'll find us doing the things he wants us to do. Being faithful servants of what God has entrusted to us, and above all, faithful stewards of His Word, living it, sharing it with others, doing good to the glory of God. May we all think on this and think of the words of Jesus here. What kind of servant am I? Am I ready? Am I ready for Jesus to come back? Am I living for Jesus? Am I watching? Am I ready to serve any way that I can? Am I serving? Am I active in living for God? What will the Lord find when He comes back? When Jesus does come back, what will He find us doing? When Jesus comes back, what can be said of our life? When all comes to an end and all is said and done and recorded in the books of God, what will be said about my life? What kind of servant, what kind of steward will I be? May we all be the faithful and wise servants of God, living and doing the will of God until He comes. God bless.